Sporting goods and apparel maker Adidas plans to shut down its only company-owned factory here in China this October. The Suzhou-based factory will dismiss all of its 160 employees, who Adidas has promised compensation packages. Now, Adidas still maintains a vast network of 300 suppliers that employ over 300,000 workers in China. But many observers see the departure of the only company-owned factory as symbolic of a general trend that is slowly developing in China. As Chinese laborers' incomes and expectations rise, many are moving from producing name brands to purchasing name brands. Just last year, Adidas opened 1,100 new stores in China, bringing the total number of outlets in the country to 6,700. Chinese consumers, who bought $1.5 billion of Adidas products in 2011, rank second only to Americans in Adidas purchases, and they're on track to overtake American consumers. Spokespeople for Adidas said the decision to begin shifting production outside of the country is part of a plan to, quote, reconsolidate global resources, whatever that means. Anonymous sources told China's NetEase that the factory will be moved to Myanmar, where labor costs are lower. As factory workers in China have begun to demand more of their employers, many netizens are wondering if this marks the end of the Made in China era. Does this mean a boost as Chinese move up the global supply chain, or is China losing its major competitive edge? To see what people on the net are saying about this, let's go over to Julia Liu in the newsroom. Now, Julia, Adidas has a pretty large footprint in China, both as an employer and as a name brand. Can you tell us what are net users saying about the departure?
Net users' reactions vary quite a lot. You can really get to see what Adidas means to a lot of Chinese people from the fact that many commenters' number one concern was what will happen to Adidas prices. Wang Lingling says, Legal Evening News, saying, after the closure of this factory, all the Adidas products will be made by suppliers, and that will certainly affect the costs to some degree. And the others are optimistic about the closure, showing the attitude of lots of net users who are usually much better off than your average factory employee. One typical example is this poster from Zhejiang. Well, these kinds of factories are running at a high cost to the environment, but they contribute little to our country's GDP, so it's a good thing that they move out of China. And for a lot more net users, though, the Adidas decision reflects the fact that China is losing its identity as the world's factory. First, we have Liu Xiaoguang, Shanghai Huosu on Weibo.com. Today in America, Walmart, 90% of the everyday products are still made in China, but who knows how this will look a few years down the road. And Xinsi Haiyang on Sina.com sounds not surprised at all at this trend, saying, look, nowadays we have more and more shoes made in Vietnam, Myanmar, and the Philippines, and we even have jeans made in Turkey. And finally, this poster on 163.com puts it simply, farewell, made in China.
Okay, as I mentioned, Adidas attributes this move to part of its plan to reconsolidate its global resources, and it hasn't given any further explanation. Nike shut down its only company-owned factory in China back in 2009. So what do net users have to say about the reasons for these two closures?
Well, as for the reasons, the majority of posters I've seen bring up the increasing demands of the Chinese labor force. Low wages used to be an advantage for Chinese factories to lure a foreign investment, but lately they've had trouble competing on price with other Southeastern Asian countries. Well, actually, recently Adidas was put under investigation by the Olympic Committee when it was found that Cambodian garment workers making the London Olympic merchandise were being paid only $15 a week. While those wages are unimaginable here in China, factory workers typically receive at least several times that much. Well, this poster on brandcn.com has this to say. What has lost its competitive advantage is not the Chinese market, but its labor force. In recent years, the cost of labor in China keep going up, and Southeast Asian countries have gradually replaced China in terms of providing cheap labor, despite the fact that the infrastructure in these countries and the worker skills still lag far behind their Chinese counterparts. And Liu Gang, a professor at Fudan University's School of Management, goes even further during his interview with the China Business News. Over the past decades, developed countries have moved their labor-intense and environmentally unfriendly industries to developing countries where labor is cheap. But in recent years, due to the appreciation of renminbi and the increasing cost of labor, raw materials, and land, these companies have moved their factories out of China. And this trend has been especially pronounced in high-tech industries and the textile and clothing sector.
All right, finally, Julia, apparently plenty of Chinese net users have picked up on this question of rising labor costs. So what do they think China should do about this? What sort of direction do they see the country's economy moving in?
Well, first off, plenty of pollsters are pointing out what they see as the economic dilemma China faces today. On the one hand, it's hard for China to go back to relying on labor-intensive industries, while on the other hand, the country hasn't really prepared to transform into a more advanced economy. First, listen to 我爱黄面嬷嬷, who complains. We have to change the current economic development model and try to find new areas for growth. We've heard the government shout this slogan for so many years, but nothing has actually been done. And I've also come across lots of posters who point out that the innovation is the only way to help China out of this difficult situation. Well, one typical such example is this anonymous poster on eastmoney.com. Innovation is important both in technology and management. The whole economy should rely on higher efficiency instead of developing at the expense of cheap labor and resources. And finally, I've also seen lots of posters who think that a mature market economy and fair competition are crucial. Listen to these comments on Beijing Business Daily. The connection between wealth and power should be broken. In China, lots of companies do well because of their close relationship with the government. That's a huge obstacle to the development of a mature market economy. And finally, Zhou Junsheng agrees, saying in the Beijing News newspaper, what China needs in the future is a real market economy environment. All the companies, state-owned ones, private ones, and foreign ones, should obey China's law and compete with each other openly and fairly.
All right, thanks for that, Julia. And that was China Take researcher Julia Liu with online reaction to Adidas closing its only company-owned factory in China. Next on China Take, some of the top trending phrases on China's most popular search engines. We're going to take a look at what has Chinese net users curious.